This video will be framing this week's topics. Specifically, we'll be focusing on the themes of food, culture, and identity. So please be sure to take advantage of the various materials on Blackboard, highlighting different aspects of these themes, such as podcasts and videos. Now, there are three dominant frames of food that have been discussed in the strategic reading, and two of which we've been discussing throughout class. First is food as nature, and we can think of food as nature as the agricultural systems as well as the ecosystems that make food gathering and processing and growing, etc., possible. That includes both our agricultural systems and it also includes the ecosystem functioning that allows us to gather food from wilderness areas, such as through hunting, fishing, etc. Earlier, we've also talked about food as a type of commodity. And in the food security and food insecurity discussions, we've looked at how a lack of food stuffs in the larger economic market can lead to negative impacts, such as famine, in various contexts. But there's also a third way of understanding food, and that's food as culture and food as an identity or as identity. And indeed, we can think of food, culture, and identity as co constitutive, or dare I say, tri constitutive. But when I use the term co constitutive, I mean that they both reinforce each other. Food reinforces personal identity reinforces culture, culture reinforces food. So they're both reinforcing, but they're also transformative. They can transform one another. So just to provide a concrete example of the three different ways or lenses within which we can come at topics associated with food, we can use the example of pizza. Food as nature, when applied to pizza, includes the agricultural systems and the ecosystems that allows for the creation of the pizza ingredients, that allows for the growing of the tomatoes and the wheat and the pressing of the olives and the aging of the cheese, etc. Water buffalo mozzarella is delicious. That make the creation of pizza possible. When we think of food as a commodity, we can think of frozen pizzas. Frozen pizzas are sold in the larger economy, and in fact, they can be treated as a type of commodity, as something that can be bought and sold on the market, and something that you could actually stockpile in the house, such as in your freezer. And in my college days as an undergraduate, I certainly stockpiled quite a bit of pizza. But we can also think of food as culture, and food as culture and as something that's connected to personal identity. We can think of, say, margherita pizzas from Naples, created in 1889 to honor the Queen of Italy, Margherita of Savoy. The colors are indicative of the Italian flag. It's very much connected to identity. And in a personal context, I remember very vividly one of my grandmothers making pizza, especially a margherita pizza, as something that was a regular occurrence. It was a sort of a treat for when I went to see my grandmother on the weekends. Right? So, in this way, pizza is connected to personal identity, but also connected to the Italian culture in general. Now, we can think of food, identity, and culture as co constitutive. And we can think of food as one way of exploring culture. So, when someone thinks of or mentions food, one of the first things that usually comes to mind is where did it come from? How does it taste? What's the story behind it? In the case of the Neapolitan type pizzas, although a Neapolitan type pizza, traditional pizza will actually include anchovies. But that's neither here nor there. But when we think of the story of the margherita pizza, for example, and how it's connected to Italian culture and named after the queen, that's one of the stories behind pizza. We can also think of an expanded story of pizza, where pizza actually wasn't very popular in Italy for a long period of time. It was largely connected to the working class as a very cheap foodstuff. But then, as Italian immigrants moved into the United States, and pizza became developed and popularized, and um, and sort of changed in that context, then it was actually brought back to Italy, which sparked an increased interest in pizza. And then we see the movement of pizza out of Italy, not only into the American context, but also into Switzerland. In fact, there's this one Swiss chef who argues that the Swiss do pizza better than the Italians and those from the pizza makers from Naples are like, this is ridiculous, right? But there's a story behind your food. So when we think of something that's as ubiquitous as pizza, that many Americans eat on a regular basis, there's also this larger historical context and cultural context that pizza fits into, right? So when we think about the answers to these questions, where does it come from? How does it taste? What is the story behind it? When we give the answers to these questions, like I just did discussing pizza, we usually refer to not only historical context, but in cases of like pizza and in many cuisines, historical cultural contexts, because food, like so much else, moves across borders quite readily. So, in this way, we can think of food as a type of language. Now, Levi Strauss, the famous French philosopher and social scientist, argued definitively almost 100 years ago that we can view food as adhering to the same practices as language because, and I quote, food is a code that can express patterns about social relationships. Well, not 100 years ago, but quite a few years ago. But here, food as a code, right? And it expresses more than simply taste, more than cheese, bread, and tomatoes, a little basil. It expresses a wide range of cultural and social facts, right? So the reading talked about eating an apple. When you eat an apple, you're not just eating an apple, you're experiencing an entire system or grammar of food. Not only um, not only the taste of the apple, not only the linguistic signifier apple and how that connects into our language, but also the cultural connectedness or the cultural significance of apples. Apples as a part of American cultural identity, as American as apple pie, for example, apples connected to giving apples to your teacher as a form of respect, and all of these different social cues that are bound up with that apple in your hand. So, Strategic argues that food helps us in this vein to discover attitudes, practices, and rituals that surround food. It's an exploration of culture in that it signifies what we consume, but also how we acquire it. The apple is contingent on a large agricultural system of production, from the growing of the apple to the processing of the apple to the shipping of the apple to the large distribution system to the five large chains that we typically buy apples from, grocery store chains, etc. This whole system, this cultural um, this cultural and systemic technological framework is indicative of eating that apple. So, how we acquire it, who prepares it, although apples are simplistically prepared, but let's say a more complicated cuisine, uh, who's at the table and who is not at the table when you're eating said food, uh, who eats first, etc., etc. All of the different social cues and typical behavior, what's seen as a socially acceptable or not acceptable behavior, taboos, etc. All of these things are connected through food, and we can experience these when we share food with a person from another culture, right? Or when we explore a different cuisine. So these are all elements of culture that are communicated through different foodways and different practices. So here, culture is inextricably bound with food. Culture is expressed through food, and food expresses culture. In addition to this co constitutive connection between food and culture, there's also a co constitutive connection between food and identity and food and culture. So, food is also central to the formation of a person's identity. Now, here to pull from the readings, identities are constructed through differences with others with the aim of achieving collective self esteem and group solidarity. This is how our readings define identity. And several social theorists have argued that identity is crucial to all people because it allows you to situate yourself and the other and to give a sense to, quote, existence and to the other in the world. So, identity here contributes to how individuals and groups perceive and construct society, but also how individual groups perceive and construct themselves. Identity is performative. It's not something that's static, but it's something that we do, it's something that we are, it's something that we enforce and reinforce every day through our various practices, such as what we eat, right? So, because of this, food is a central part of the creation and enforcement of identity. Our various different habits, our value systems, so what we see as right and wrong behavior, acceptable and taboo behavior. These are all examples of identity that's reinforced through behavior. And food is essential, as I said, a part of this. And what's interesting about food as a performative, or what's interesting about identity as a performative, is that, like tastes and how tastes can change, identity can also change over time based upon different impacts that you've been experiencing throughout your life. So, foodways, identity, culture, these are not static. These are always in transition, and they are connected to one another. So our identities are constituted, as I was saying, through a combination of our own self-styling and incorporation of various outside factors, including values, traits, taboos, characteristics. So again, as I've been saying throughout this entire uh, lecture, food, identity, and culture are intertwined. And the negotiation between foodways, culture, and identity constitute our individual identities. However, it should be noted that there are many different ways that we construct and reinforce both cultural and personal identities. Food, while it's an important aspect, and while it's a, a key component of this course, which is why we're focusing on it, uh, there are many different ways that we constitute these two things that step outside or that do not involve foodways. So I just wanted to note that. However, we should not underestimate the importance of foodways in cultural identity and personal identity construction. Now, because food is so inextricably connected to personal and cultural identity, it can be seen as a form of cultural communication. And strategic is very is, has a very positive view of this type of communication. And as we'll see, Lisa Helke pushes back against food as, say, a positive form of communication. So she doesn't see anything wrong with food becoming readily available outside the culture that it originated from. Um, for her, this doesn't mean that it loses its identity. And she used the example of sushi in the reading. And she argues that just because sushi is readily available in restaurants and in supermarkets uh, from, from Japan to Amsterdam doesn't mean that it loses or that it's lost its cultural significance. Sushi um, still plays an important role in Japanese foodways. And in fact, the fact that sushi has become so popular for strategic, this adds prestige to both the cuisine and the culture. So you can see it as a form of positive advertising. And we could use the example of pizza as well. Italian culture um, may be seen in a better light because of the readily available Italian cuisine in the United States. And similarly, Strategic argues that sushi has helped to popularize Japanese culture, and as such, this popularization is very much a good thing. Second, she makes the important note that when we look at food as connected to culture and identity, and when we recognize that it's not static, we can think of food traditions as transforming. And as people move into different contexts, such as uh, Japanese citizens moving to Amsterdam and becoming Dutch citizens, um, there's a lot of cultural mixing and hybridity. So she sees the movement and changing of cuisines um, through immigration patterns, etc., as an expression of hybridization and the hybridization of identities. So, as such, she sees the movement of cuisines as a positive form of cross cultural discussion. However, Lisa Helke, she's a quite well known philosopher of food, she is worried about this type of facile understanding of food as communication. So Helke argues that food as communication could slip into food as cultural appropriation, and that we need to be very careful to guard against this type of activity. So she argues that eating various cuisines could be a form of appropriating or utilizing aspects of another culture in problematic ways. And she says, just because I ate at a Thai restaurant in the reading, doesn't mean that I know or that a lot about Thai culture. And I'm not learning about Thai cuisines. Well, she's learning about Thai cuisines, but she's not learning about the cultural nuances of Thai society. That yes, eating the food of another culture um, is an aspect of learning about the culture, but there are other necessary conditions that need to be met before we can think of food as communication. So she doesn't see food as effective communication, but she's worried that we could appropriate important cultural elements for our use and benefit. by um, acquiring and utilizing different aspects of various other foodways. So I'm curious what you guys think. I'm curious if you agree with strategic, that food is an important aspect of cultural communication, or if you agree with healthy, or if you're somewhere in the middle where foodways or experiencing another other cultures through foodways could be a form of cultural appropriation. And in fact, it probably depends on the context, right? But I'm curious what you guys think. Uh, Interestingly, and I put this article in Blackboard, there was a similar argument made by citizens of Portland concerning a burrito chain that connects to Lisa Helke's argument. So please be sure to check that out. Let me know what you think. The purpose of this brief video was to set the stage for our discussion. So I am looking forward to your thoughts on food as identity, food as culture, and food as communication, and also food as potential cultural appropriation. So if you have any questions or concerns, please let me know. Thank you guys very much, and I will see you during office hours, and take care.